Salt.
They were the best of foods, but condemned as the worst of foods. They were supported by science, but reviled by hypocrites. They fostered good health, but were demonized as poisons. They sustained a vibrant food culture, but were maligned as chemicals. They were pillars of nutrition, but victims of superstition. We sank from scientific crescendo down to mocking innuendo. The blind lectured the deaf, the extremists uncorked the bottle of folly, and all the nutritional myths poured out.
I have pleaded in my report and will plead again orally here for more research on the problem before we make announcements to the American public.
Well, I would only argue that senators don't have the luxury that a research scientist does of waiting until every last shred of evidence is in.
The McGovern Committee's report was written by a young staff member who happened to be a vegetarian and had no background in medicine or health research. The committee recommended a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet for everyone and offered some ideas that could only spring from the mind of a politician.
The McGovern Committee on Nutrition marked the end of the age of reason in nutrition and ushered in an era of disaggregation and confusion in our understanding of food and the role it played in our lives. It not only resulted in a consumer that was buried in bits and pieces of data taken wholly out of context, but served to remove the common sense perspective we traditionally had on diet as an integral part of the process of living. It also led to the greatest health epidemic ever faced in this country. The United States Senate Select Committee on Nutrition, or the McGovern Committee, which ran from 1968 to 1977, had the primary objective of dealing with poverty and hunger. But because it was governed by bureaucrats and politicians, it quickly morphed into a witch hunt looking for villains to blame for all our health problems, some real, but most imagined. That committee, using the tobacco industry as the poster boy for big industry's abuse of the small consumer, opened Pandora's box to every unscientific crank and advocacy organization craving to bash the food that we ate and the food industry as villains that were out to kill the very consumers they depended on. Scientific evidence went out of fashion, and innuendo became the currency of nutritional debate. These pretenders would have done well during the McCarthy era and would definitely have been the stars of the Salem witch trials. Forgotten was the fact that the American diet produced and fueled the most decorated athletes, the most effective soldiers, the hardest workers, and the most vigorous economy in the free world. By the end of the McGovern Committee hearings, these politically motivated cranks elected to continue with the Dietary Guidelines, which immediately deconstructed our diets into nothing more than a context-free catalog of chemicals and characterized foods as nothing more than packets of medicine for an ailing population. I know, because I was there. I was invited to speak to the bumbling bureaucrats all about the nutritious new products that I had developed in Canada. I never met such a bunch of uninformed, absurd reformers in my life. They hadn't a clue about what food or dynamic nutrition was all about, yet they all considered themselves as experts, a false pretense that still goes on today, especially when it comes to what we call consumer food activists. In the beginning, the chief poison was fat. Fat was supposedly killing us all, despite the fact that our healthy life expectancy was continually rising. Fat was the new tobacco. We had to get rid of all fat, particularly animal fat. Excellent histories of the demonization of fat can be read from the titles that are now scrolling on the screen. There are dozens more such citations. Just put the term demonization of fat into Google and they will all show up. The point is, we spent millions of dollars to pursue a witch hunt on fat when the scientific results did not warrant it at all. The supposed big-name experts that we trusted betrayed us. Yes, the experts we trusted betrayed us. They did it by leaving out all the critical scientific data that didn't support their agenda. It was a clear sin of omission, and it still goes on today. By deliberately leaving out evidence, these people are simply cheats, or even worse, because the consequences of their deceit can result in a grave risk to the public. The chief anti-fat advocacy group was the American Heart Association, quickly followed by the consumer activist groups, the Center for Science in the Public Interest, and the National Heart Savers Association. They both immediately attacked the use of saturated animal fats and forcefully endorsed and lobbied in favor of trans fats as a healthier alternative. Can you imagine? The Center for Science in the Public Interest lobbied in favor of trans fats. In response to this attack, the food industry began replacing animal fats with trans fats. It was neither the industry nor the consumer market that demanded the much wider use of trans fats. It was the consumer activist movement and a government unwilling to evaluate the possible health consequences which created the market. Fat was reduced or removed from all products, and they were supplanted by calorie-equivalent alternatives that looked guilt-free in a society that was panicked into a fat phobia. But you can't just remove fat from food like you do when you spin the fat out of whole milk. You try to maintain the original character or texture of the full fat product by replacing it with things like gums from cellulose, carrageenan, pectin, or bacterial xanthan. You can use maltodextrins, inulin, beta-glucan, polydextrose, modified non-digestible triglycerides, and even esterified propoxylated glycerol. All this to replace natural fats for no justifiable reason. Have you any idea of the chemistry it takes to make or refine these so-called natural fats? If you want to characterize foods as chemicals, this is the place to start. The McGovern Commission and the Dietary Guidelines marshaled in physicians who have almost 0 hours of education in food and nutrition to make judgments on what we should eat. Of course, if you're a hammer, everything you see ends up looking like a nail. So food became characterized as a form of medicine. This originated our irrational phobia of fat that led to the widespread adoption of trans fats. All this ushered in the obesity epidemic that today threatens the long-term health of this nation. The McGovern Commission, the Dietary Guidelines, and the sanctimonious attitude behind it is the greatest challenge to dietary health we face today. Listening to the talking heads on TV who repeat half-truths and innuendo, parading around as if it were sound scientific evidence, or listening to the countless consumer advocates who could not earn a dime without creating sensationalism totally out of context, only extends and exacerbates the problems, the illnesses, and the deaths. We have to start using our own common sense to take some self-responsibility for our health. Do you actually believe that you can become less obese by lounging on the couch in front of a widescreen TV, eating some miracle fat-gobbling berry from the jungles of Peru? Get real. You have to get yourself up and start burning calories. Walk, run, cycle, do some form of work. Start easy if you have to, but start. And every time you sit down to eat, look at that plate and try to remind yourself how much work you will need to burn it off, and then maybe you'll leave whatever you don't need over for the next day. There's no magic or miracle solution to losing weight. How many generations of chumps will it take before we stop believing the con artists? It's a bit late to prevent the obesity epidemic, but we can still manage it if we act rationally. When it comes to salt, use the history of the fat fiasco as a guide. Follow all the evidence, not just the FDA's or the CDC's sins of omission. Disappointing as it is to say, these organizations, which were once internationally respected, have become little more than political tools. The rank and file employees may be qualified scientists, but their administrations follow an agenda devoid of anything resembling science. The evidence and our health statistics prove we are amongst the healthiest people in the world consuming our current levels of salt. It also says that if we cut down on it, we will fall into the range of far less healthy people. Yet, the bureaucrats are following precisely the same failing tactics that they did with fat. It's like they can't help themselves. It's déjà vu all over again. And there is every reason to believe that a similar disaster will follow. Don't let the government and the snake oilers do to you with salt like they did to you with fat. This is still a free country where you're represented, so don't just sit around twiddling your thumbs and acting like a victim. Contact your representatives and tell them that the government is fiddling with your family's health. What better issue is there to contact them? And if your representatives need a full list of the latest science and medical evidence, tell them to contact the Salt Institute. At the same time, they can also contact the FDA and the CDC to get a list of medical evidence. And then they can compare it with what was received from the Salt Institute. That's when they will see what a sin of omission really means.
Salt!